Hey,
Hello.
Mark.
what's up, man?
Very good with the
This is
intrepid
Mark Pellegrino, Mark Gleason,
Mark
just
Reese.
in case you're not familiar with our faces on Twitter. And this is Rick Repetti.
Hey, yes, Rick, what's up? Hey, Mark, how are you?
How are you?
Great to see
I'm
you.
hanging in there, man. It's great to see you in person.
Yeah,
You are you
in
you
person.
are a great warrior for reason, Rick.
He is indeed.
So
Much
are both Marks here. We've got a quorum now. There's three of us.
That's right. That's right.
that's
That makes us
awesome.
mighty. Well, Mark, welcome to Apex Level to Power. This is our little corner of the web where Rick and I talk about all things based upon reason and unreason. So we certainly are happy to have you join us. You are a very important voice. I told Rick the other day, I always think that I have this endless patience for idiocy online if I see even the faintest hope that I can reach them with reason. And you are tireless with your your threshold for putting up with nonsense is even higher than mine. So that's one of my questions today: is where does that fortitude come from? Is it simply that you are sharpening your own sword and trying to learn the issues better yourself, or do you honestly have an endless reservoir to help these people?
And before you even begin to answer that, I want to add just a little bit of emphasis from my end of it. Mark brought me into some of these Twitter discussions that you figured in with a bunch of people who are, I think, your followers from Supernatural and whatnot. I'm sure you remember that. It was only, we could count on hands how many months ago that began. And like within a matter of weeks, I was blocking and canceling and, shutting some of those voices down because I just couldn't deal with them. But I believe it looks like you still with some of those people, because I see people responding to you and it says, I can't read because I blocked them or something like that. So yeah, you have like
Yeah,
infinite
I've
patience and endurance and stability to deal with this sort of, so sorry.
Yes, well, unfortunately, I believe in a finite universe, so I know that's going to run out sometime, that patience. But the mute button does help. The mute button does help.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's more of a
I learned that from Gad Sad. Gad Sad said, "I've muted you so that you can still get the benefit of my wisdom, but I don't have to hear your bullshit."
I like Gad said. Yeah, that's a clever approach. That might be a little more humane than just blocking people. Yeah.
Well, very
I
good.
think
Well,
it's cool because they don't know they're not in on the conversation anymore. So that's what's
Yeah.
fun about it.
Clever.
Well, very good. Well, we did want to get to your very interesting initiative that you just launched. For
Yeah.
listeners, for our listeners who are not aware, right? You are a star of stage and screen, have been in many programs, Supernatural and others. But what they may not know is I only know part of your accomplishments, but you're part of the founding member of the Capitalist Party, I believe, and you have
Yes.
this new Guardian project for anti-bullying, along with a few other things. So, perhaps maybe you could just describe to our listeners who are new, hearing you for the first time, the various things that you do, and then of course we want to talk about your new project, the Guardian Project.
Well, primarily I'm an actor, which means to me I put bread and onions on the table, pretending to be other people and to live in other universes, alternate universes. And I have a lot of fun getting paid to be 5 or 6. So that's great. But I have far more diverse interests than just acting. And primarily, I love philosophy and politics. I love ideas. I've always been enamored of ideas, and that has led me into a sort of activism. Politically, it's led me to see that the political landscape, though it appears to be populated by two opposites, it's really just the same political ideology with slightly different mechanics and slightly different focuses. And that led me and a partner to think that this might be the opportune moment to slip in an alternative, a third way, or a second way, actually, since we just get sort of iterations of one way of looking at things. And so we got together with Andrew Bernstein, and a objectivist philosopher who basically wrote the platform for the Capitalist Party. We bought up a bunch of domains and we put the ideas out there in the world in the hopes that we could get someone somewhere to start a grassroots movement to get this third party up and going somewhere in the world. So that's the political side of things, and then the Guardian project is an attempt to deal with the phenomenon of anonymity on social media and what I think that phenomenon does with respect to not only civility, but how it enables criminality, not just uncivility and discourse, but enables criminality, where threats are normalized, libel is normalized, slanders and false narratives and spreading those virally about people become normalized, canceling innocent human beings, trying them in kangaroo courts on social media becomes normalized. Violence, in essence, is becoming normalized. So the Guardian Project is an attempt on several fronts to cope with this problem, since our society seems to be incapable of doing it on its own.
And that's great. And I mean, I think I am myself, because my background, very anti-bully. As a matter of fact, Rick and I were both bullied as children. I wonder if there's a relationship between that and being a strong individualist or not. But so it's a very personal thing for me, which is why when I saw it, I said, we have to get involved in this, Rick, because we're both very, very kind of anti-bullying. And certainly, you know, the people are getting bullied for just not having the right ideas or articulating unpopular ideas. And that is so intrinsically, anti-American, I would say, but certainly anti-reason, that it becomes a more of a larger fight than just kind of trying to save the small individuals, but we're trying to save our whole society with this effort. And certainly cancel culture feeds right into that, right? Cancel culture essentially is the word of the mob coming to try to silence you for no other reason than there's more of them than there are of you. So that's certainly very critical.
And it often involves some kind of anachronistic, retroactive application of contemporary norms to behavior of yours 20 years ago or something, when behavior was totally socially and culturally acceptable. But now it's like, oh my God, we've exposed you as some kind of a monster.
Right.
Yes, that's a particularly insidious ingredient to this current cancel culture.
Yeah, Mark.
I mean, I'm one that believe. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I believe I read that. I would just like for you to speak to, if I'm correct. I believe I read one of the things about the Guardian Project. Maybe it was an interview or something where, did you indicate that it was inspired somewhat by your role on that 13 Reasons Why? Somebody.
Yeah, and in a way, it was a question that was asked in an interview for a media outlet, and I hadn't made that integration before the question was asked, to be honest with you. And then as I began to think about it, the sort of premise of 13 Reasons Why is our interrelationships with each other and the behavior, and each one of anything we do has a great effect, has a ripple effect, and that we may not even be aware of how important our behaviors are with respect to other people. And to take responsibility for that is sort of the I think the moral idea behind 13 Reasons Why. So I thought that fit sort of perfectly into this schema, I guess, for lack of a better word. The idea of what's missing because of anonymity is personal accountability. What's missing because, a person is on the other side of a keyboard is that human face, that sense of real connection. They're an abstraction, and abstractions can be tortured and thrown away, and they have no meaning to you. And so 13 Reasons Why, personalized everything. And I think that it's time for us to do the same in social media, or figure out a way that it's really hard to make that other person an abstraction. It's really hard to be cruel online, or to pass on false narratives without actually feeling the repercussions, the consequences of your actions.
So is one of the aims of the project to make anonymity less possible on social media?
I think so. We're trying to figure out ways to do that, because I honestly don't think, I don't know much about the algorithms that rule Twitter, for example. You might know more about those than I do, but they certainly seem prejudicial. They certainly seem to be informed by a social justice narrative that
Absolutely.
that pushes out groups of people and promotes ideas, but doesn't solve the problem of violence, verbal violence, threats, false narratives. And so look, I think the boundaries of free speech are very clear. It's force or fraud, right? If somebody's lying about you, passing around false narrative, ruining your reputation, that's not free speech. And if they're threatening violence, that's not free speech. Deplatform Hamas and Hezbollah and ISIS, because these organizations foment violence. Do it to the same to the alt-right organizations that foment violence, but make those criteria, those standards, violence and fraud, as your criterion for what it should be banned or not, and then link identities in such a way that people can't just log back on when they're kicked off. The punishment's real. You're gone. You're banned from social media. You lost your privileges when you threatened to rape that person. You lost your privileges when you said, I want to punch you in the face. I want to tear your head off. I want, or when you pass that rumor that is not a fact around and that got that person fired and there's objective damages from it. Now you can't come on social media. You are in effect canceled, but for all the objectively correct reasons, because you're using violence against people. And it's appropriate to cancel violence. That's what I think anybody who wants civilization wants, to cancel violence, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a great idea. I hope it's successful.
There's lots of ways to do what you're describing, and that's a very exciting area. I'm from technology, so my head's already spinning as to some of the things you could do. What is the idea behind your project? So you're raising money on Kickstarter, we see. And what is the plan for step one?
Well, this step one is a television show, a reality television show, like Catfish or To Catch a Predator or America's Most Wanted, where we find victimizers, we build a case for the victim, and we allow the victim some form of justice. And whether that's some form under the law of slanders and stalking, whatever laws, we might even have to reform laws that enable that person to get justice in the legal sense, or a form of restitution, or where the victimizer can turn over a new leaf and under our umbrella, under our capes, contribute to internet hygiene and be sort of on parole while they reform themselves and help their victim process the damages. So that's the idea, is to make this a television show where we see this happening in real time. And then I think there are other phases, support phases, where we have a site where people will be able to go get help when they're being bullied, and they'll be able to tap resources that will help them psychologically and in other ways. And then I think we want legal reform as well. I think we need to go into some of these states where it's nearly impossible to sue somebody for ruining your life, for libel and slander. I know in California, I actually looked into it because I was being attacked on social media, and some of these trolls had taken out a change.org petition against me. They were attempting to get me fired from all my jobs, making up out of whole cloth what I was guilty of. And companies fall for this. They just don't want the pain in the butt of having to deal with this stuff. So it has real life consequences. And when I went to this lawyer, he said, well, here's the deal. In California, if you attempt to sue somebody for, say, defamation, there's an automatic countersuit leveled against you. So they automatically get to countersue you. And at that point, all of your information is subject to being judged by someone in the opposing counsel. So they can take every tweet you've ever said, every private text you've ever made, and paint it in the way that to paint the narrative that they want. And then if you can't prove the additional to overcome the additional hurdle of proving intent, like the person knew that this was wrong when they were doing it and they were trying to ruin your career, which is very difficult to prove, and you lose the case, you're on the hook for all of their legal expenses on top of everything else. So yeah, so you have to look into, possibly spending at minimum $200,000 to sue somebody for ruining your life, and you probably will not come out on the winning side of that.
Wow, that's terrible. So
It's
the
awful.
program sounds fantastic. I love it.
Well, I'm hoping we can get a team of lawyers to start, really working on the legal system, because I mean, we don't have the Inquirer anymore. We don't have, people are becoming their own news outlets. They're becoming the spreader of information in a way that was only open to a media outlet at one time. And so that means these people should be held accountable, perhaps in the same way, and that the laws have to shift to accommodate this new dynamic. That's my opinion.
Well, Mark and I have already contributed to the Guardian Project, but Mark had another idea he wanted to run by you today.
Well, look, it's a very worthy project. I see you guys have a Kickstarter and you're trying to raise $20,000 by the end of November, I think it is.
Yeah.
We certainly want to donate and help, but we also want to make it a little fun. We have our own little following who are small but dedicated, and you of course have a much wider following. So we wanted to kick back and forth some ideas with you. When we launch the podcast, we publish this podcast. We could be prepared to match. One idea we had was we would match any donations for the next 48 hours after the podcast launches.
Nice.
Wow. And up to make sure you hit your $20,000 goal. Right.
Thank you. That is great.
Well, we want to make sure we get you
across
the finish line.
We wanted to make sure we liked you, that you liked the idea. We didn't want to just do it without your approval.
I like that idea. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So that halves your goal basically that we need to raise, because we'll cover the other half, right? Or to get you to 20,000, whatever that is. So now we're trying to think of something fun though that we could offer for that. And
because I noticed when I donated that people could get for a certain amount of photographs signed by you, a 5-minute Zoom call or whatever. So what was your idea, Mark?
Oh, well, I don't know. We could be as simple as another podcast we do where we take a bunch of user questions and you answer them. I also, my niece said maybe she could give you some movie lines that she might like to have you read, different famous movies or that kind of thing.
Of course, my stepdaughter thought the reward should be that she gets a Zoom call with you, but we'll leave that out.
All those sound cool. I'm up for whatever.
Well, we'll work out the details with you.
Okay. Sounds great.
All right, so we are fairly excited about this idea, and certainly we like to again match the funds to get you to your $20,000 goal, and we can communicate by email on the particulars of that, and the technology behind this idea. So if you have Facebook, right, where I do need to have a credit card, and I haven't really tried to game Facebook in any way, but my name is there. I'm not really on Facebook very much, but it's different than Twitter in the sense that you can put any name you want, and only Twitter knows who I am. So there's, in that sense, there is some a free market has found a solution to making sure they know who I am, and Twitter can ban me, as we know, right? Because they're conservatives. So the issue really is that there is a way to identify people, and there is a way to curate your platform. But the problem is right now it's kind of being used in a way where some abuse is tolerated and other abuse is not. So I guess my question to you is, do we simply need a platform that works the same way as a Twitter or a Facebook, that identifies you by credit card or whatever it is? You have to identify yourself to even get on the platform. It's curated in a way where hate speech, violent speech, by real reasonable definitions, not this crazy cancel culture definition, is curated, and we have reasonable, rational debate happening. And the only downside to that, and I'm going to throw it to you, is sometimes anonymous speech is important, right? You need to be able to say unpopular things without the powers that be knowing who you are. It could also be possible technologically to say, I have some device or some thumbprint, whatever it is, that logs me in. I'm able to do this in a way where it's kind of a double blind, like I know who you are, but I can't identify you. right? So I know that you're legit. I know that you're an individual out there, but I can't identify you. I'm not sure who you exactly are. But I know if I kick you off the platform, you can't come back in, right? It's because I have a unique way of identifying you. So I guess my question to you is, do we simply need a new social media platform which is more responsible using all the current technology? Or do we need to go a step further and make sure that there's some biometric way of identifying people in an anonymous way where they truly can never come back on the platform?
I mean, that's a very good question. I think the market is trying to answer that now, right? With Gab and Minds and Parler. They're trying to come up with a free market solution to what's going on right now. I don't know. I see. I'm looking at it. Remember, from the perspective of a verified personality, so everybody knows who I am, and so what I say is automatically linked to my identity. Now, they don't have to know where I live. They don't have to, know all kinds of personal information about me, but they know I'm a real person saying real things, right? And what's wrong with I mean, certainly in this country or any first world country, what's wrong with that form of identification where it's out in the open, where you know who people are? You don't know their personal information, but you know it's a real person, and you know the organization has enough of their information that they could, if they deplatform them, it's a permanent across the board social media ban, because that, let's say that information, their driver's license or whatever personal information that they can't get away from, is linked into a social media network that then says, oh, this person has a history of violence, history of threatening people, history of passing lies. We don't want them in the social discourse. I mean, is that unimaginable? Is that bad?
Well, no, it's essentially what Twitter does today, right? I just don't like the people they ban and the reasons they ban them for, right? So what you're
Right.
suggesting then is we just need Parler or Gab or one of these other offerings to get their act together a bit. Now Gab, I think their major failing to date seems to be they have no standards whatsoever. I guess last time I was there, anybody can post anything. It's kind of anarchy. And
Right.
while I'm all for that from a philosophical perspective, it does that you better have a very, very elegant way, like you're saying, of filtering and banning people. Which, by the way, which is kind of the idea behind the original Facebook, right? Is that MySpace was the ability to go on the web, post your information, and anybody in the world could see it. And very quickly you realize you don't want everybody in the world to see your information. You only want your friends and maybe friends of friends. And so Facebook was this opt-in solution that said, I have my circle, I can expand my circle to friends and friends of friends, friends of friends, and I can ban people, unlike them or unfriend them. And that's the way we're going to do it. Twitter, you're just on there and you can block people and then they can ban you from the platform. So all I'm saying is it does sound like you're just asking for a more centrist, fair-minded Twitter and Facebook.
I'm asking for objective rules for sure. I mean, and of course, since it's a private business, they don't have to have objective rules. I'm hoping to be able to convince them that that works in their favor as a market. I think it's not just that they're losing conservatives; they're losing credibility and period. Because they're showing that they're not so tied into objective standards. And I think after a while, that's going to turn off people on the left. Even, you know what I'm saying? I think they're going to. So if Twitter does operate that way, then just tie it to objective rules, so that and make it universal, so that those bans. I mean, can somebody go on a different computer, a different device, and pass themselves off as somebody else? I'm asking you as the tech guy. Whatever the way they can keep that person from being on any social media would be great.
I could see both your idea, which the more social media platforms opted in, the greater their value would be for people who respect these ideas. But I could also see a venue for Mark's idea where people just don't feel safe enough yet to log in and say, I'm voting for Trump or whatever it is, because of whatever the circumstances are, but they've been verified by the platform. And if they violate the rules, they're banned. And they could be banned across all social media, because the criteria for that is even more liberal, that they can hide who they are to everyone else, but not from the platform. So that might be a transitional platform that if we had enough of the protections that the Guardian Project wants to establish, that platform won't really be necessary, because what's wrong with people knowing Mark Pellegrino said this?
Right.
I agree.
Yeah, well, the issue, again, the devil's advocate here, right, as the libertarian, is objectivist leaning libertarian, and we'll talk about that in a second, is that, look, Ben Franklin famously, right, wrote under the name Silence Dogood, right, as an alias to put out unpopular ideas. And so do I feel comfortable? 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you said, yeah, this is a great idea. Let's just have only the company know who everybody is. Well, now you have Twitter and Facebook and Google knowing who you are, what you think, what you believe. And they can click a button and say, here's all the Trump voters, right? Am I comfortable with that? No, I'm not. To Mark's point, it's because they've lost my trust completely, right? They are so obviously partisan and agenda driven that they have lost my trust that they can be trusted with this information. So in a free society, is it important that we be held accountable for things we say and do? Absolutely. Should we make it difficult for people to look? Antifa literally in Seattle and Portland put out a call for lists of businesses and people who are right-leaning and support Trump, so they could go burn down their business, attack them, harass them, right? So we need to balance, right, the ability to ban bullies from platforms and also not give people an attack list if they want to go after certain people with certain kinds of ideas, right? So I'm not sure what the right answer is, but I think it's something kind of like what I said before, which is if there is a way of knowing who you are and still establishing some anonymity about it, so that you can still use an alias online. It doesn't have to be, your
Publicly
actual
revealed,
name.
right?
Now, again, if I have to go one way or the other, I'm with you, Mark. We all should just use our real names and be accountable for what we say, and
We use ours
it
online.
will eventually sort itself out. But again, you have some people who voice unpopular ideas sometimes who need some kind of anonymity in order to be able to do that. So that's the only flaw I see in this ointment.
There might be a relationship between this ideal that Mark Pellegrino is advocating about us all having our identities known, and the reduction of cancel culture, even if none of the other things the Guardian Project was going to try to do. If we just got this internet thing established, then eventually, I would imagine, people would be less afraid to speak their minds. I don't know.
Well, I think one of the things that we're inheriting here, right, is I'm living in a society where we don't talk about ideas, we don't talk about capitalism versus socialism, we don't talk about religion and all these other things. So we do that for a reason. We want to try to get the business of everybody. I don't care who they are. I want them to do business with me, and that's all well and good. But then there's a certain vulnerability there that if you need to, you're building up this house on sand, essentially, right? So if I was making my money as an objectivist with an entire objectivist group of people buying my works, I could, if I'm Yaron Brook, right, I could pretty much say whatever I want in line with objectivism, I mean, and you try to cancel me all you want, right? I have a loyal base who's following me and supporting me in that way. And maybe that has to be part of that, is that, we have a group based on reason. Look, Brett Weinstein is on the left, right? He and I don't agree on some things, but we agree it's very, very important for us to have a platform where we can talk about things, reason through issues. He's not going to cancel me. I'm not going to cancel him. I'll still buy his book when it comes out. Maybe we just need to expand that platform. And the funny thing is, when the left starts saying, I want to identify businesses that support certain ideas, my first thought is I'm against that. My second thought is, well, yeah, I kind of like it when CEOs come out with these wild positions on politics. And I'm like, wow, I use those guys. Look, Expensify, who I use for my business, just came out, and they used my private information that I gave them, my email information, for my billing and this kind of thing, to contact me and tell me who I should vote for in a 3-page email from their CEO. All right. And I wrote back and said, you have lost my trust, right? I'm using you because you're my solution in the marketplace. I'm giving you now resources, obviously, to use against me politically, but more than that, you abused my private information that I gave you to start emailing me on my 3 different emails they have, to try to sway this kind of political election. But Look, it's a free market thing. So fortunately I could march somewhere else. All I'm saying is I think, if as we speak more about these issues, cancel culture is forcing us out in the open to talk about these issues. I'm hoping that the people forcing it are going to lose that debate. They're not going to be, the solution they're looking for, they think they're looking for, is not going to come to pass. What's going to come to pass is me and Brett Weinstein are going to realize we have a lot more in common with each other, being moderate right, moderate left, than we ever do with any of the extremes. And maybe we can come up with this social media solution in the middle, where ideas are allowed and harassment is not.
I think Brett is already coming to that conclusion. He's already said he relates to, or he feels more of an intellectual home with people who lean right, because he sees that they're more receptive to having a dialogue. And I mean, that says something. That definitely says there's a shift coming.
Hopefully people of reason, right, can come together.
Well, my only other worry, and this might favor Mark's, what I've called an intermediate or transitional suggestion about this semi-anonymity, is because of cancel culture and the power of political correctness and online mobbing and all this. So many people are censoring themselves. So like a big culture shift has to change before people stop censoring themselves. And the agenda that you're hoping will become the norm, until it does, there's still going to be people who wish they had the opportunity to express themselves anonymously. Those, I don't know how big that number is, but those people who will express an opposing view anonymously, as opposed to those who will just censor themselves, regardless of what the technology is.
Mm-hmm. Can I jump in here with some level to power concepts? Because
Please.
This podcast is called Level to Power. Rick and I are co-authoring a book that will be coming out at some point. And the idea is this. So I grew up thinking that kind of brains were all that mattered. I read Ayn Rand very early in my life. I thought the smarter you were, the better you're going to do in life, the more successful you are in life. And as I got older, I realized that there were some very, very smart people who weren't doing very well at all, and some not maybe as bright people who were extraordinarily successful. And there was some other criteria missing from this mix that I wasn't seeing. And one of those critical pieces, certainly it's philosophy and the way you go about it, but is what I realized is a matter of perspective, right? That there's people who can only see their own perspective. We have level 1, 2, and 3. And level 1 can only see their own perspective. That's it. They're unable to put themselves in somebody else's shoes. They have very low, what's called cognitive empathy, the ability to understand somebody else's position. Then you have level 2s. Level 2s can see their own position and somebody else's as well. They can kind of put themselves in somebody else's shoes. Now, there's no morality associated with that per se. A con man who can put himself in your shoes can con you quite well, right? But a psychologist and counselor who can put themselves in your shoes can help you quite well, because they can see where you are in your paradigm, where they want you to be, and they can move you there.
Mention level 0.
Yes.
And level 3.
Yeah, I'm getting there. Right.
Okay.
So level 1 is I have my own perspective in the world, and it's really only about me. And level 2, I can see somebody else's perspective. And this ties right into bullying, for instance, right? Because it's a lot easier to bully somebody when you only have your perspective, even if you do see their human face. The inability, the lack of cognitive empathy, and there's emotional empathy for the listeners, where you feel what somebody else is going through. And then cognitive empathy is the ability to understand intellectually what somebody else's position is. And level 3 would be a higher level. We were able to take into account many perspectives, but most recently level 0, which was kind of an afterthought when we were creating the framework. And level 0 is you don't even have your own perspective. You're not even your own person. And we intend to be kind of a cult member or somebody who's in a kind of a drugged out state who lacks a sense of self completely. Well,
or a political zealot or religious zealot.
Well, what came to pass was in the past year and a half, where we start looking brilliant, right? Because level 0 perfectly explains, let's say, a wokest cult member who has no opinions of their own, right? They're simply almost like a religious zealot who are just parroting different things they've heard, right? Now, and these steps actually give you the remedy, which is if you have this cult member, like any other cult member, the way you get that is by breaking down the individual, right? The individual perspective is how you create a cult member, right? If we want to bring you into our cult, we got to break you down as an individual. And the answer for that is to restore the individual. If you're going to try to break them out of this cult, you got to remind them that they're their own person with their own ideas and their own priorities.
They're entitled to an opposing view.
That's right. And so you have this kind of meta thing, and Rick and I have been talking about this for a few years and developing these ideas and developing a framework. And I'm doing it because I'm in business, and I'm doing lots of executive kind of management consulting and helping executives manage people and manage, get things done, move masses of people in certain directions. But then we look at this assault on individualism that's going on in our society, and it really is deliberate, because you can't create a good cult member, right? If there's lots of individualists running out there, you need one neck for one leash, as Ayn Rand used to say.
It's the 10 commandments of woke attitudes and responses.
That's right.
Towards anything on the verboten list.
So what we wanted was, we wanted a handy, so for my executive clients, we wanted a handy framework where we could say, who are you dealing with? Are they level 1, level 2? Because that matters. Can they only see their own perspective?
Or a level 0.
Yeah, or a level 0, right? Meaning, are they some cult member who's just repeating what their authority figure has told them with absolutely no value add? Is it somebody who has perspective and they're dead set on it? Or is it somebody who, let's say, is like you hit a kind of a bureaucratic troll who's just obstinate in protecting their fiefdom in a company, and you're trying to get something done? That's different than a level 2, who's somebody who can see other paradigms, but they're doing it in a very evil way. They're manipulating and they're trying to steal money from the company.
Sociopathic ability of perspective. Yeah,
that's right. So it's a very handy framework that we've been using with my business clients to say, who are you dealing with? Are they a level 1? Are they a level 2, level 0? And then here is the playbook of how to address that, right, with them. If they're level 1, you do this. If they're level, and we even use kind of a D&D, if they're good, chaotic, or evil. Level 1 good, level 1 chaotic, level 1 evil. So so this is our framework that we use on the program, and we're building a framework to help talk online and deal with people. So as that relates specifically to bullying, to bring it back to that, is you have 2 kinds of bullying. Well, 3, honestly. You have level 0, when they're basically a cultist or a religious zealot or somebody who has no sense of self other than the tribe that they've adopted, the group. And they bully for that reason, because they're just trying to get you to believe like they do, because they're
following marching orders.
That's right. And then there is then there's level 1, where they have their own perspective only, but they have their own ideas. They've been adopted. The interesting thing about level 1 is, if you change their mind a year from now, they'll shift. But then when you say you change their mind, they'll go, no, I thought this all along. Like, they are honestly convinced that as they moved and changed their opinion, they never did, right? They were always right. But so you have a level 1 bully who sees their own perspective, and that's it. And therefore the emotional cost and the guilt is very low for them, because again, very sociopathic in that sense, right?
They interpret their opponent through their own agenda, and that's it.
That's it.
It's as simple as that. And
then you have a level 2 bully, somebody who knows full well what they're doing, right? There's pundits online I could probably name who seem to fit this category. They know their perspective, they know your perspective, and they're trying to find the thing that's going to hurt you the most, right? They love it. They love kind of finding that. So level 1 is kind of just throwing things over the wall. And if it hurts your feelings, it's kind of random, because they really can't see your perspective. It's like a 5-year-old trying to do it, trying to insult you, right? A level 2 bully is somebody who can see their perspective, your perspective, and say, okay, well, Mark's not really bothered by this. He's not, I made fun of his looks, and he doesn't really care. Let me make fun of how dumb he is and see if he cares about, he cares about that. Okay.
So they use their cognitive and emotional empathy just to figure out how to destroy you.
That's right. And so I want to introduce that to the discussion and just say that, so sometimes we tend to refer to that when we're talking about these topics. And particularly when it comes to anti-bullying, there's this element that you need to identify the kind of bully it is to find the right remedy for that particular kind of bully. And I'm not sure if there's a place for that in the Guardian Project or not, but certainly as we're talking about solutions, so even about a platform where people come on, right? You probably need one way of eliminating the level 0s, which are just the bots who are on there, the human bots repeating mindlessly what they know. You need
I'm glad the way you said that, the human bots.
That's right.
Because there's no real distinction between a human bot and one of these programming bots.
That's right. And then the level 1s to me can be saved because they're the people who have a perspective, but they've been trained this way from their culture, their society, their group, their neighborhood. And
The challenge to them is to get them to see that other level one perspectives opposite of theirs have equal cognitive value, depending on the relationship between their view and the facts, the evidence, objective reality.
And that's the group I think your show reaches, right? So the Guardian Project show, the level zeros, they don't care, unless their group cares. The level one, when they start to see another perspective, it's going to be painful for them, right? But they'll say, oh, maybe this wasn't the best thing. And then the level twos who are bullying anyway, they see the other perspectives and bully anyway. I'm not sure how much the show is going to help them, because they already see it. They already know they're hurting somebody's feelings and they don't care, right? So when we're targeting the show, I'm just saying, I think you have 3 different targets. And fortunately for you, the level one is like 80%. It's most people. Most people are just stuck in their own view of the world, and they don't really know that they're really the damage they're doing. And those are the people I think that your show can help.
Just yesterday, Mark, you posted a little clip of yourself talking about a really horrible example of trolling, bullying, language, and whatnot. That's that's an evil level too on our just to something.
Yes, I saw that. That's sociopathy right there. That's a sociopath. And or an academic who's said all the wrong things for so long, their career is based on it, and they're not going to go back. They sort of know you. Krugman sort of strikes me as a level 2 guy. Is he a level 2 guy?
Absolutely. He would be evil level 2 in my opinion.
Yeah.
He knows exactly what he's doing. He knows exactly what he's saying. Honestly, okay, just you can make it a little more complicated. We all kind of move between these levels, and if you could be a level 2 all day long on many issues,
or level 3 for the most part,
and you hit something which emotionally triggers you, your girlfriend or your wife or whoever says something to you, and all of a sudden you're mad. You can only see your point of view, and you're like, well, I didn't do that, and then a week later you go, oh, maybe I overreacted. That's you collapsing down to level 1 because you're emotionally triggered, and then gradually moving back to level 2, seeing her perspective as you calm down. Well, there's so much emotional confusion in our society today, deliberately, because people are being led away from reason so they can be controlled easier, that they spend most of their day at level 1 because they're being buffeted back and forth by these emotions, right? So they're triggered on everything. Literally, they describe themselves as being constantly triggered. That's why they're at level 1.
Most political communication in the media, on social media and everything is designed to trigger emotion.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's what,
and collapse people down.
And,
so what tribe do I belong to? I need to vote based on my tribe.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I think Rand spent so much time saying emotions aren't tools of cognition. And some objectivists have taken that to the extreme to think emotions aren't helpful at all in the human experience, which I don't think is true, but they're certainly not your means of primarily understanding the world. And people nowadays from K through 12th grade all the way through college are now confusing feeling with thinking.
That's right.
And so they're primed for this kind of level 1 reasoning.
But just merely acknowledging that other perspectives exist. Okay, I'm sneaking this in the back door, right? Past the censors at the schools, hopefully, which is that you must acknowledge there is an objective reality to be known implicitly in that. You must acknowledge that you have a subjective view of that objective reality. And you must admit that there is another subjective view which could be as equally valid as yours, right? And you need to at least engage with it and acknowledge it. So by taking the premise of these levels, you are, which is very, I think, most people could kind of wrap their head around it intentionally. We're trying to make it easy to consume. You have already accepted Rand's most important points, right? The metaphysics of the objective universe, the fact that you have a faulty mechanism by which to view it, which may or may not be correct. And then the only next step is we're going to use reason, because we're also big on reason, logic, fallacies, that kind of thing, to engage with the world as our means to knowledge. So we're avoiding all the trigger words that are going to make people alarmed, but we're also trying to give them the right way of thinking. And look, Ayn Rand had said, I think I myself, when I read Rand, ran to the anti-emotional side and said, it's all just about reason, right? I think I overdid that myself. But that's not what Rand says when you read it, right? She says your emotions are a lightning fast calculator of your values. They are not a tool of cognition. They're simply a response to your environment. And
They're a shortcut to cognition
they're a shortcut, a shorthand of what your values are.
of what your prior commitments are based on
That's
how
right.
you've reasoned through things already.
And
Yep.
what I tell people all the time is the proof of that is that if you kill somebody who breaks into your home and you feel guilty about it, and I spend a year convincing you that self-defense is correct and your family was there and you had to defend them, and you change your mind on that issue, you will cease to feel guilty, right? So your guilt, your feeling of guilt didn't tell you morally what was right or wrong. All it told you was what your value structure was that day, right?
And unfortunately, people are adopting their value structures without integrating it through the rational process.
Exactly.
So it's just kind of coming by osmosis and then finding its place within them sort of willy-nilly. It's not being organized by their mind at all. It's not even being critiqued. It's just coming in and remaining there. That's scary.
It is scary. Well, and that's what I tell people is it's like you get a file in your mind of a new thing that happened, and you can either go to a room, open the door, and just chuck it in and slam the door and hope it all works out, or you can go file it somewhere, and if it conflicts with something which is your filing, you can look at these and go, which one of these is the better thing, right? And that little step every single day, I really do feel like when I was 18, 19, if you had met me and some of my friends, I was always a pretty bright guy, I think, but some of my friends, I don't think there was a big difference in talking to me and talking to them. I mean, you wouldn't be able to say, well, this guy's clearly has it together over these guys. But, I read a lot, engage with ideas, struggle with ideas. It's important to me that I don't have contradictory ideas in my head, right? And as you know, it's a lot of intellectual work every single day, every single minute, every single week to wrestle with questions. Well, 20 years later, right, the difference is stark, right, between if you ask them a question, ask me a question. And the answers I can give and the connections I can make, right, are really an order of magnitude above. And like anything else in life, that's not because I read one magical book, right? It's that little incremental. I took an idea, I critically analyzed it. If it didn't quite fit, I struggled with it for a while until I found that answer. And that is so missing from education today. I mean, I have two children, two boys. They of course get that 24/7 at my house. They, they can name logical fallacies. We'll be listening to a podcast or something, and it'll come up, and I'll stop it and say, "Okay, guys, name the logical fallacy." But my God, it's missing, and honestly, it's intentional, right? Well, there's two reasons I think it's missing. The first is, why should I spend a huge amount of resources educating you or your children or strangers, right? So there's that implicit kind of friction that says, why should I go around spending my time trying to make you all better? That's your responsibility. That's kind of number one. But number two, we are taught the things that make us easier to control, right? And I mean, I go through K through 12 and you don't know how to calculate a credit card statement, interest rate properly. That's not accidental. They don't need you to do that in order to be able to, become a tax slave. These critical things that you could get taught, you don't get taught, and I think it's intentional. And certainly now that people used to call me conspiracy theorist 20 years ago when I said that, but now that you have the wokeness at the helm of these schools, it's pretty clear that why would they teach logic? I mean, literally, standpoint epistemology is the opposite of everything we're saying, and logic itself and reason itself is being outright called racist or something, right, Rick? Well, one plus, you saw my profile, or may have seen my profile or my bio, my email. I have to put 2 + 2 = 4. I mean, I have A = A because that's, Rand's thing. 2 + 2 = 4 is now a thing you can use to identify yourself with, right? And wokists are proud to put 2 + 2 = 5 on their bios. That's where we are. My God. But let me just ask you this. When you read Rand, when I read Rand, I said, there's a lot of truth here. She's a little over the top. I mean, a little hyperbole in here, but I get what she's saying, right? Now I'm seeing what's happening going, oh my goodness. If anything, she understated it, right? She lived through that communist Soviet Union breakdown, and she just kind of reported what she saw, and it seemed crazy, like 2 + 2 = 5, but all of it's coming true. All of it's happening.
Yeah.
Do you kind of experience that yourself, where you thought maybe this is good stuff, but maybe it's a little over the top, and now you've been looking at what's happened the past year?
And the other part of the question, which we wanted to ask you, was how did you become an objectivist? What brought you to Ayn Rand? And are you still? I think I read somewhere that you posted that you were in a philosophy program or something. Or I don't know if it was objectivism, but could you speak to all of that kind of?
Yeah, I mean, you do read Atlas Shrugged and think this is impossible in the extreme that she's writing it, and now that we've seen it, we know that that's not true. What Rand was great at was seeing the logical end of any thought, and she nailed it. Yeah, and I was turned on to that crazy 2+2=5 thing by James Lindsay, who I think is a pretty important intellectual to follow on Twitter. And it is unbelievable that academics are actually arguing about this now. As far as when did I become an objectivist? At the theater company that I eventually ended up teaching at, I used to argue with this one guy all the time. We'd rehearse and then we'd go to Gorky's Cafe, a Russian cafe that was open 24 hours in Hollywood. And we'd argue until 5 a.m. We'd read plays, we'd do other stuff, but primarily we would argue with each other. And he was always beating me at these arguments. I couldn't quite come up with a formula to beat him, and that was important to me. So I thought, you know what the deal is? I just don't have the words to articulate my point of view. If he only read these books, X, Y, and Z, he will be converted to my point. So I said, hey, buddy, let's do this. We'll have a book exchange. You give me your 5 most important books. I'll give you my 5 most important books, and then we'll meet in the middle and see who wins. I gave him 5 books. He gave me The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged.
Oh boy.
I don't think my books really had too much of an impact on him, but his certainly changed me. And not quite immediately. I mean, I did resonate with many of the values in both The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, but I don't know that it trickled down into my gut for many years. Certainly, it took me a long time to release the notion of God and to give up my religious values. And part of that was through the more rigorous study of joining the Objectivist Academic Center, which is a 3-year course in philosophy and communication, basically, where I got to compare and contrast other philosophies and think about Rand in a way that I hadn't before, because the professors challenge you to question her philosophy, find the flaws in it. And so you work like hell to try to find where the errors are. And I wasn't smart enough to find them, but that's me. So it's just
quick interjection, Mark. That's
Yeah.
level 3 work. And that's what Ayn Rand says is the volitional effort that you make to cultivate your cognitive repertoire.
Yes, level 3 is the goal. I like the roadmap that you guys have created. I think that can be used not only as a way of identifying people, but communicating with them in a way that is much more productive than what I've found on social media.
Right. You diagnose where they are, and then you figure out, well, what's the best strategy for dealing with somebody who's stuck in this way?
Yeah. I mean, especially on social media, there's a young lady whom we have all corresponded with, I think, and there's many, so I don't think I'm identifying her, who's clearly a level 1, just kind of, has her own perspective, cannot possibly be moved, for whatever reasons. And then there's a few evil level 2s who kind of are, playing with words and trolls, try to manipulate. They know exactly what they're doing. And, you get pretty skillful when you start thinking of things in this way of levels. You start asking 1 or 2 or 3 questions, and by the second or third question, you know exactly who you're dealing with, which gives you your, do I block them? Do I try to convince them? Do I waste time talking to them? We all have an intuitive sense of that, but coming up with a system for that that anybody can use is kind of our goal, right? And honestly, they can tie right into the Guardian Project, or certainly an anti-bullying effort, to say, here's the 5 things. Wouldn't it be great to say, here are the 5 steps you take before you want to mute or block somebody, right? Ask them this, ask them this, ask them this. And if by here you haven't gotten to this point, you're probably not going to, right? I'm not saying that list exists today, but boy, that'd be handy, right?
That's very good. That's very good. Yeah.
The analogy that comes to mind is one that I use when I'm teaching, usually on the first day or the second day of intro to philosophy classes, where I make an analogy between a weather vane and our belief forming process. When a weather vane is functioning, the wind blows on it and it indicates the direction of the wind. If you put a glass dome over it, it'll be pointing where it was last working, right? Similarly, evidence comes into our belief forming mechanisms. And if they're always pointing one way, even as new evidence comes in, it's not really coming in. So that person's stuck at level one. I don't use the level one terminology in the class because that would be a little too much, but it's that person is stuck with one perspective. And
well, I think
in our culture, people brag about it. Like I recently got into a debate with somebody in my extended family who made the remark that I wouldn't care if there was 100 people like you, me, with all kinds of great arguments. No matter what you present to me, I would not change my opinion about, this election, let's just say. And that was the topic, right? And I thought, yeah, in our culture, we actually treat that sometimes as if it's a cognitive virtue, like that's a strong-minded individual. But really, they're bragging that their weather vane is not working on my analysis.
Well, that's true, but then when you think about, I think some of these terms are defined in popular culture by skeptics, so it makes it really difficult to explain that there's such a thing as certitude without dogmatism. To me, it's contextual certitude, and there's such a thing as questioning without this concept that no truth is possible, that no certitude is possible, that you can't know anything, that and most people seem to be is swinging between poles of I can't know anything, or what I know I'm sticking to irrespective, because they don't understand what a principle is, how one acquires knowledge, what it means to acquire new knowledge, how does it overturn old knowledge, does it build upon I don't think they've thought about this stuff, so it closes them off. You could be a skeptic closed, or a dogmatist closed, equally closed to information, right? Is that just me?
It's almost like we need another layer in there, like a level one.
Well, that's a good distinction.
A level one skeptic, or what I mean, like
level one dogmatist.
Yeah. We need like a finer distinction to help you. Again, you cannot come up with a solution to the problem until you diagnose it, right? So when you're trying to speak with somebody, your brother-in-law at Thanksgiving dinner, you need to very rapidly, in a way that does not trigger you, get to a point where you understand where they're coming from, why they're coming from that way, and the right remedy, the right way to answer it. And that's what I want to give people in a framework where you just say, yeah, ask these 5 things. Depending on that, this is what you do next, in a very easy consume way. Because for somebody with high verbal IQ like yourself, who thinks profoundly about things, you have a certain knack of being able to, let's say, size somebody up on social media, get where they're coming from. I always say there's 3 levels of combat. There's logic, and when people lose that, they go to insults. When people lose that, they go to physical combat. So you go seamlessly between logic and the insult game, hilariously, right? When people try to troll you. But my point is, how do we bottle that though, right? So you are a certain person with a certain skill set. How do we bottle that for everybody so that they can do what you do in a systemized kind of way, that honestly also reduces the emotional angst? Because when you have a system and you say, well, if you're a well-meaning person who feels guilty about blocking somebody, or guilty about your relative, and arguments that are occurring, if you can classify them and say, well, they're really an evil level 1 who's just trying to make everybody else miserable. It's a lot easier for you to let that go in your mind and say, okay, I don't need to care about this as much anymore.
One possible question on that list of 5 questions might be, do you recall the last time you changed your mind about anything important?
Yeah, that's a good one.
That is good.
Yeah.
If that is good.
No, put them on the mute. The mute button goes on.
Well, people ask me all the time, what do you disagree with? Not all the time, but the best question I get on Ayn Rand is, give me one thing you disagree with that you wrote. So I'm going to ask you that question, actually, Mark. Is there, what if we go to objectivism for 1 second? So what happens is, I read Ayn Rand, was changed by it, embraced it. And then at some point, some of the leaders of the objectivism movement would say things, and I'd say, oh, I don't really agree with that. That seems a bit too far for me. Or so I stopped describing myself as an objectivist and said, I'm not really a strict objectivist.
Like what? Can you give me an example of what one of them would say?
Well, so when people ask me what do you disagree with in or at least one of the gray areas in my mind, and there's very few of them, honestly, which is not a great response when they're trying to probe whether I think for myself. But Ayn Rand had some very interesting quote around like native peoples and the rights to their land.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So, and it was kind of very dismissing, saying, well, if they're not going to use their land, then of course, it should be colonized and settled. And it was kind of a dismissive thing. Now, my answer to that is I disagree with her characterization of that. I'm not sure what her real position is on that. Really, what this is a clash of nomadic culture versus sedentary, stationary agricultural culture. You have people who roam the land trying to gather things. You have people who want to stay in a single place and farm. And that is this clash she's talking about, right? But I certainly don't, we can bring up the quote, but I don't agree with her characterization as she said it. That would be one area where I might stray. There's other
That's
things.
a very specific conclusion of her. That's not like the structure of her philosophy. That's its application to a particular complex historical case.
Yeah. So anyway, so I guess, is there something in objectivism that you've found difficult to accept or
even that you
around?
haven't figured out yet, but you've
sure. Yes,
puzzling to you?
I had constant clashes with my professors over a concept of a certain amount of biological determinism in not only your ability to exercise your will, but in other aspects of your personality. So, and how experiences physically shape your brain in such a way as to make make it more difficult for you to access this thing that objectivists just kind of imply is natural to you. Not natural, meaning accessible to all of us, right? The ability to focus or not, which is the essential concept behind Rand's objectivist notion of free will, I think can be hampered by experience, which has physical effects on your brain. And those physical effects, to some degree, mix deterministic elements with your personality. So I am wrestling with what free will means. I don't buy the Sam Harris argument. I don't think we're a vat of chemicals, and I don't that are just sort of biologically reacting. I don't agree with where he places his moral sentiment, that seem to just sort of naturally be an organic aspect of our being. I do think we have this faculty. I'm just not how clear I am yet of how much of it is within my control, because I see myself being more able to access my free will at 55 than I was at 20, at 22, 23. And so there's something to be said for this. What do you think? I mean, that's a problem for me. I don't know if you have any issues with that.
Huh.
At length, we have many problems with each other on this.
We have debated countless hours on free will. Yeah, that was what I wrote my dissertation on. Most of my publications have been on free will and on the extent to which you might be able to alter how much free will you have based on your cognitive exercise of your abilities and whatnot. So yeah, you're certainly onto something, but the fact that neither of the three of us have solved the perennial issue of free will is nothing for any of us to feel embarrassed about.
Let me just say the fact that Rick has not accepted the fact that I've solved the free will debate is where we are. Well, no, but certainly, when you read Rand, you get enthused that anybody can do anything, and it's all a matter of embracing pure reason. But then at some point, you get reminded that there was some genius who, stalked Madonna or something, right? Because sheer intelligence and ability to reason doesn't necessarily give you your goals. I mean, you need to be grounded in some better way. There's other things going on. The size of your amygdala, which tells you, when something is threatening to you. If it's overactive, everything's a threat, right? If it's underactive, nothing's a threat. Sure, let's do all this stuff. It's fine. So you take two people who are on opposite ends of that spectrum. One's very xenophobic and has everything as a threat, and one who's kind of live and let live. There's no threats, don't need to worry about anything. And you give them both objectivism, and you give them both the power to reason. And I think 20 years ago, I would say they're going to arrive in the same place, right? 20 years later, I hope they arrive in the same place, but I think it's a good question, right? Because they just are going to see the world in fundamentally different ways, even if they're grounded in reason as a philosophy, even that's their epistemology. They're just going to make different judgments. And is that within their control? You know, maybe, maybe not. Like you say, I mean, can you look at a history of bad gambling decisions? And even though you don't feel the need in yourself to say, wow, this is a scary decision, I shouldn't make it, you can look back at your history and go, yeah, probably shouldn't do it because it hasn't worked out for me in the past. I mean, can you get there? I suppose you can, but it's a good question. I mean, so where did you kind of land on that? You have you have the basic biology you started with, right? If you grew up in an
Yeah.
abusive household, your brain kind of stops growing and starts just consolidating earlier than if you're not in an abusive situation.
Truth. I have
And
experienced that. Go on.
yeah, and then you have, you know, your 20 or 30 or 40 years of trauma following that. And you say that you're able to access your free will better than you ever have. What I hear when you say that is that your emotions, you're less a victim of your emotional whims, where you want, you know, you feel like doing this and you feel like vindicated in doing this, and you're able to better align your actions with your spoken commitments, right?
Yes.
So that's what I hear when you mean that. Is that what that means?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it doesn't help that when you're an actor, you're trained to be an emotion forward human being. You're trained to fundamentally do the opposite of what objectivist teaches you to do. You're trained to trust your quote unquote instincts, what you feel in the moment, and you're trained to not inhibit behaviors in the moment. So as a young man growing up with this kind of training, I'm on stage 5-6 times a week practicing this. And then behind the scenes, I'm practicing at home, I'm practicing it everywhere. Well, what becomes habituated is this idea that, you know, these feelings are my truth and I have to follow them. And it takes an extraordinary amount of self-control to see beyond that. I think you reach a stage in life where I don't know whether it's less hormones are surging through your body, or you've exhausted the potentialities of those emotional experiences, so you can now sort of see more clearly than you did before. But yeah, that's definitely something to growing into. And you grow out of the whatever body that you had before that makes it a little bit more difficult, but you're also maturing in your ideas and conceptually, and able to make more integrations, I think, that enable you to overcome an emotion. Like you see beyond it a little bit more for, I think, a complex number of reasons. So I don't think it's simple. I mean, where do I land on the free will? We have free will. We do have free will. And I know it sounds like I'm qualifying it by saying, but there's these other factors that step in and push us and touch us and move us in directions. They do, but I can still focus. I still can do it unless I have real brain pathology, chemical imbalances, or some other things that need to be fixed medically or by diet. I can focus. I can choose to see the wider context, and I can act on that. I think there's something to the notion that it's really hard to do it if it's against what I'm feeling, and that people are going to tend to go for what they feel over the proper course that their mind is telling them, right? There doesn't seem to be any reward in it, or the reward is abstract. And so it's easier to go for that immediate emotional fix. But I come down on the side of free will. I just don't know that the objectivists are completely right in understating the physical dynamics of the mind and how the mind comes to be.
It might be that the objectivist perspective is somewhat idealized. It's aspirational, especially since volition is a key component of it. If you're not exercising that volition, then you're going to be vulnerable to all those things that you're worried about are mitigating factors. But once you start exercising your volition, in exercising your free will consciously, the more you do it, it's a muscle. It's like any other virtue, like courage or generosity. The more you practice that behavior, the more it becomes automatic for you. A skill. Skills have an automated component to them. The more you dribble a
Absolutely.
basketball, the more of an effortless skill it is for you to control that ball. Same thing with free will, in my opinion. That's
No, you're right.
my understanding of it.
I think you're right, and I think that's what disturbed me so much about. There was a character, and was it the Atlas Shrugged? Did James Taggart commit suicide? Sorry, spoiler alerts for anybody who hasn't read Atlas Shrugged.
Oh, just don't spoil don't spoil the ending of Supernatural. I'm on the last 5 or 6 episodes of the entire thing. So,
all right, I won't tell you what happens. I do know what happens, but
I'm sure you do.
Because I think I was disturbed by that, because I think Rand's thing was, there's a point at which you reach a point of no return. And for me as a human being, it can't be true. You can't reach a point of no return. Yeah, your free will muscle is atrophied because you haven't been exercising it, like James Taggart just lived by his emotions and not by his wits. But if you start exercising it, it's like any exercise. It really sucks at first. It hurts. It's a pain in the ass, but you just keep pushing through it and keep pushing, using your will to keep pushing through that cognitive dissonance or whatever you call it. And eventually it becomes something you want. You enjoy it. You like the burn in your muscle. You like wrestling with ideas and figuring out what works or not. So yeah, Rick, I'm on your page in that respect. I think you're right. It is a muscle. Everything. I mean,
everything's a muscle.
Right. Your body is extremely economical. It only uses it gets rid of what you don't use. And so it's very important for us to maintain that free will. And luckily, taking class for the number of years that I do, engaging people on social media as well forces me to exercise that muscle all the time and figure out whether I'm right or wrong. I need to revise. It's exercising my free will constantly, and maybe that's what's made me have more control over my life. I don't know.
As an expert in emotion, right? As a trained actor. And by the way, what you described before, being able to overcome things, that's our concept of a level 2 and 3, where you're able to have a spoken commitment, feel the emotions surging up, which kind of wants to drop you to level 1, your own perspective. You're going to lose your temper. You remember your spoken commitments. You're able to push past it and do what your spoken commitment is, your philosophical value is, versus what your feeling is to do. So you mix with that, seeing other perspectives. That's kind of our level 2 and 3 when it comes to social interaction. I've been accused before by those who know me well of being hyper rational, right? Of discounting the emotional side of my life by doing this. And I've always maintained that no, what I'm doing is making sure that I feel the emotion, but I'm not letting it force me into make bad decisions, right? I'm keeping to my spoken commitments without being swamped by my emotion, and then a year later regretting what I did because I got emotional that day. So here you are, I won't label you as hyper rational, only because people use it on me as a pejorative. You're an extremely rational guy, but you have been obviously your emotional IQ is extremely high as well, right? So when you're pushing past this, when you have the swamp of emotions and you are pushing past it to let your rationality and reason kind of be in charge, take the wheel, how do you experience the emotion fully, so you're not losing any of it, but not let it dominate you? What acting secrets
I'm sure all those roles where you had to fully identify with something helped give you some of this cognitive empathic repertoire, which kind of is level 3 training in a way. Being able to play any role. So you really take on you're encouraged to take on the perspective completely. True? Like
yes.
Method acting kind of thing, right?
Yeah, sort of. Sometimes you have to do what they call the magic as if. So we were, the audience is in the narrative and they're in the story, but you're in something similar. You're in something that you relate to. It's as if, but it's your own personal identification. So you're still acting from your known mental and
subjective
universe, but everybody else is interpreting it in terms of the story. I mean, for me, it's a difficult balancing act if you have overpowering emotions to at once look. If you knowing that you have the feeling is itself is not you're not repressing it. You're accepting it and you understand it. It's there. You're not pushing it down. and but and so I can't come up with any fancy or necessarily
Well,
clear way of saying, well, how do you balance those
well,
components?
okay. So there was a time in your life, probably recently, right, where you had something that happened and you suppressed the emotion to keep your reason in charge. And that's what I get accused of doing sometimes is I'm
Oh,
suppressing and letting my reason run. And what the
right.
goal, I think, is to experience the emotion, give it some legitimacy, but not get swamped by it. And I guess,
you
you know,
you may have to take time out, like you are experiencing the motion even when you're pressing it down to deal with the present moment, and you may have to confront those feelings later on when you're done dealing with the crisis, or you may have to say, I need a minute, and go out and get that all out, and then when you've expended it, come out, now I can think more clearly, let's deal with this. But
so the as if that you just said, let me give you a concrete example from my life.
sure.
I deal with people all the time. We negotiate all the time. I'm this level to power guru. People can't get under my skin. We're all good, right? And I'm in this meeting with it was a very vanilla meeting where we're talking about bringing an offshore resource. And we interview the person, and his English skills, communication skills, just were not very good. And for this role, he needed to have very, very good, English, very good communication skills. So we said to the company, "Look, I think you just need to give us another candidate who has higher communication skills." And these guys were like, "Well, yeah. So nobody else has complained, just you. So we think he's fine." And I said, well, no, I've talked to him. It's just, we go through this dance about 4 or 5 times, and I find myself getting hot under the collar. I find my temperature rising. I know that I am somehow being called some kind of closet racist or xenophobe. Now, I
Mhm.
work in IT. All I do is talk to people from foreign countries and hire them and work with them. If I can't understand them, trust me, other people are going to have issues as well. And it was a rare moment where I didn't lose my cool in the meeting, but I remember almost stepping outside of myself in that moment and being like, why are you so mad about this? What's here for you? What's driving this energy for you? Right. And in that moment, I was able to kind of keep my cool and do what I need to do and then go off and examine it. Um, and the funny thing is when you said this, so here's my scenario. I'm in this situation. What I didn't have was this tool, which you just said, which was this as if.
Mhm.
Um, so what is that as if thing or whatever it was you just mentioned for acting? Can I step outside myself? Would that would give me something I could use, step outside myself and bypass this false
Well,
accusation?
it's sort of a fancy way of fooling yourself that the context isn't what it is. For example, I used to do this play. We did a play at the theater company I was involved with for 7 years, and there was a section of the play where veterans, I played a veteran, a Vietnam veteran, would come out to the wall and talk to their friends, and people would be backstage, prepare what we call emotionally preparing. They'd be stirring up their emotional lives back there to get upset when they're out on the stage. And I never prepared for that. I would just give myself an as if. I would walk out there as if I was walking on holy ground. And because there was when I saw the Ten Commandments as a child, when Moses came to the burning bush and God said, "Take off thy sandals, for thou art walking upon holy ground," it was so impactful to me that just walking out there as if I was walking on holy ground emotionalized me. If I talk to you as if you can't hear very well, it's gonna change my behavior, right? And it's gonna, and that induces emotional life, because doing creates feeling. And so, as if is just sort of placing yourself in a different context, and you just say this person is talking to me. Well, you took an as if that was probably a real interpretation. The person's talking to you as if you're a racist, and it made you react.
Right.
So you shift the context with the as if. I don't know what you would create that could
Well,
make you look at it in a different way, but it's possible.
well, the funny thing is, I guess I could look at it as if this was a play, right? That we're all just actors reading our lines, that this is just a play, that I have no personal stake in this exact moment in being called these words. And I just need to act out my part. That might help actually make it more more remote for me, less personal, feeling
Well,
less personally attacked.
from your levels analysis, they're triggering, I don't want to be blamed for something I'm not. So self-defense mechanism came in. So you collapsed down into your emotions and you weren't even as if you were still being who you're supposed to be. So
Well,
you could do the as if thing to just say, I'm going to handle this as if I have not collapsed down.
Well, exactly. So my emotional triggers are illogical, being wrongly accused, and bullying, right? Are my three emotional triggers. And if anybody hits one of those, they'll get some kind of, reaction internally, at least. If they hit all three of those and all three of those are at play, that's when I get a big reaction. They were being irrational. They were illogical. They were accusing me wrongly, and they were acting as bullies. So
all of that we can put under the heading of justice. You have a feeling for justice, and I'm the same way. I have those are my triggers too, and it's like, right. And it's not bad. It's good that you felt that. To me, it's healthy. It's healthy that you were like, what is this jerk off saying to me? What are you implying? I mean, I might have not have had as much self-control as you. I might have said, what are you trying to imply about me right now? Let's be honest. What are you implying about me? I'm not implying anything. Okay, good. I can't understand your guy. Okay. I can't, and if I can't understand him, and I talk with people from all over the world, I know other people aren't going to understand them. Is that clear to you? Yeah, good. And then I would have been gone. Because look, sometimes as Rand, objectivists say, that sometimes that emotional life is an instantaneous assessment of what's really going on.
Right.
And you got to listen to it, and you got to say, this is correct.
What?
But tailor your response accordingly. Yeah.
An analogy that I use when I'm trying to teach my students something else about cause and effect or whatever is that I'll put my hand, we have a smart board, so there's the light shining on it. I'll put my hand up and it'll create the shadow on the board. And I'll just say, look, very simple distinction. My hand is causing the shadow, not the opposite. But you could infer the shape of my hand from the shadow. So there is information in the shadow. Emotions are the shadow of the cognitive value system. So when you see that shadow in front of you, create this mnemonic. What's casting the shadow? My values are being, scratched in the wrong way or something like that. And that alone could give you the leverage to remember not to fall into that emotional shadow. It's just a shadow.
Well, this incident was one of the reasons I created the level to power. Was I said I need, if I can just say, he's a level 1, he's an evil level 1 who has his own agenda, doesn't see my perspective. That's one way of dealing with it. He's an evil level 2 who sees, he's obviously benefited from implying people are racist before. It's gotten him things in the past to play this card, and he's just playing it again, and I can deal with it another way. So I'm a systems type mind. So for me, having a response where I say, let me ask these 3 questions and figure out what's going on. Exactly what you just said. Like, well, what are you implying? Let's just put it on the table and be open about what you're saying is an excellent response. And that's kind of what I want to give people, right? I want to give people a training or a system or a card or a poster on the wall or whatever it is.
Yeah, this is a work in progress.
This is a way of thinking about things.
It's a work in progress, so we're happy to get suggestions from you, Mark.
Absolutely. Now, and Mark, we usually go for quite a while. We're like Joe Rogan on our podcast.
Yeah, I just want to kept you a while.
But we respect your time, so we're happy to continue. But you've been very, very generous with your time to date. So,
we didn't get to talk about the election yet. That was one question we wanted to ask you about.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that.
If you've got to go, that's okay.
No, I've got a good 30 minutes.
Oh,
very
good.
So you can reveal as much as you want about your own personal vote, but certainly it's interesting to us what the objectivist perspective is of the election. And let me just say, I have heard some of the some things from Yarn Brook and other people in the objectivist movement, which have all along been extraordinarily anti-Trump, to the point where it doesn't sound reasonable and rational to me, right? You have 2 flawed candidates, you have 2 flawed sides, like you said in the beginning. That's kind of how I see it. There's pros and cons to going each way. There's not a really great choice. But
there's no objectivist candidate, of course.
Exactly. There's no objectivist candidate on the ballot, right? So you either do nothing, the classic libertarian, problem, if you just throw away your vote, or you pick one of the sides. And there seems to me there's some reasonable positions to take on any of those. So where do you feel like objectivism, good objectivists out there, how should they be looking at this election? And of course, feel free to share any of your personal attitudes.
Yeah, I don't know that that I could speak for objectivists because I think they're all over the map. I think many objectivists are voting for Biden. I think many are voting for Trump. I think Euron is caught in the middle of that as a pretty intense critic of Trump. He gets the objectivists from the right nailing him. My personal point of view is that whenever anybody tells me voting for a third party candidate is essentially a vote for, whichever candidate they don't like, Trump or Biden, I say, I disagree with you. That is not the case. It's what I'm saying is I will not be complicitous in the government that you are choosing. And I am washing my hands. If you're saying my choice is to die slowly or quickly, I make no choice to die. I'm not going to do that. And so you can't accuse me of throwing my vote in for arsenic over cyanide. I'm taking the other choice, which is a slightly more nutritious choice. So I almost left the presidential part of the ballot blank. I almost didn't vote for it because there were a few things Joe Jorgensen was saying with respect to woke culture that was really sort of bothering me.
Me too.
And I thought she was pandering, and I just couldn't take her very seriously. But she's the candidate on there who wants to hurt me less than anybody else, and so I decided to vote for her. Now, I don't know that. I think the objectivist position would be it's completely moral not to vote for either one of them, and that is just as substantial as any other expression. If I were to speak for objectivists, which I don't, but
now, and this is an issue that libertarians in general and objectivists in particular always struggle with, right? Is you have a movement of individualists, and herding cats is very difficult, and therefore getting a nominee that we all can rally behind is extraordinarily difficult. And therefore, what I always say to Rick is I'm always torn on it. We actually were at the Objectivist Conference, what was it, last year? And I asked a question of Dave Rubin and Yarnbrook on this issue, which is I'm always torn. Like I want to kind of go down with a philosophical ship as a purist and say, I'm just not going to vote. I'm just going to stay out of it. We'll just let these people destroy each other. But then I always think that there was people like me in communist China, right? Who were like, nope, I'm not going to side with it. I'm not taking sides. I'm not going to, those I don't agree with them fully either, or them. Therefore, I'm just going to sit here on the side. And they got wiped out, and they're no longer part of the conversation. So I look at that and I say, am I being a pie in the sky philosopher unrealistic, or should I be doing something which is going to have a meaningful impact on this election? Now, so that's, I struggle with that question a lot. I go back and forth on it, quite frankly, on a daily or weekly basis. Like, I'm just not going to do anything. I'm just going to sit here on the sidelines, watch the whole thing go down. And then I say, well, though, I feel like I can make more of a meaningful impact here than I can here. Or at least this one's a greater threat to the Republic, and this one is just kind of more of the same, right? So I struggle with the question. And I guess I also struggle when people tell me, objectivists, that I am morally culpable by voting for either side, right? That you're part of the problem if you're voting. And I think this comes down to this kind of purist versus realpolitik approach, right? Are you interested in physical real world results that are going to affect you in the near term? Or are you interested in more the kind of the philosophical purity of your ideas? And like I said, I go back and forth on it. So,
well, at some point you have to start recognizing the connection between politics and ethics, and you have to start actually acting on it at some point. So might as well be now, right? Otherwise, we're left with these ethically compromised human beings forever and ever and ever and ever. But I think as a public figure, I can inspire people to get off the train. Or to get out, you don't have to go all the way to the top floor, get out at floor 2, or, just to give them some other alternative, if anything, to see that, pure principles, these pure principles of governance and ethics that we have, they're real. They relate to the world. And there's a reason that neither of these guys really has the answer that can help any of us long-term, or can really progress us, beyond their term. in office, and the reason is because they're not sticking to principles of governance, and so we have to bring that into the argument at some point.
But what changes the conversation for me is this woke cancel culture, mobs of people burning businesses, mobs of people beating people on the streets they don't agree with, right? The civil society, the breakdown of the civil society. So that kind of changes the calculus for me, where I say, okay, you got one side who's, in my opinion, is kind of, a wink and a nod, kind of allowing this to happen because they see they're going to gain political power from it. You have the other side who's been shouted down and kind of refuses to even defend themselves, like the capitalists, who refuse to defend themselves against all these accusations of racism and everything else. And then you have the libertarian candidate, right, which is always a viable option because over time you can build a real movement there over time, who comes out and sides with the mob, right, who comes out with the wokest culture and says, yeah, I'm a part of this. And I think my response to her was just like that. Trump became the libertarian candidate in the race, right? Because at least he's calling out this woke culture, the cancel culture mob for what it is. Now, there's many other things that are imperfect, but we can't even have a rational debate about anything, any topic, if we don't have a civil society where we can say the things we need to say and all deal with reason, and people aren't just tribing up into mobs to attack each other. So there's some kind of larger issue for me in this election. I was very disappointed with the libertarian candidate when she chose to do that. That kind of took an option off the table for me. What say you?
I mean, it almost did for me, but I took it more as election pandering than as maybe as deeply as you did. I look, and I'm not somebody who suffers from Trump derangement syndrome. I think there are things he's done right, and I do think that he's right to battle this culture. I just wish he were a more articulate spokesperson against the culture. He does it, and he does it in such a boorish and ham-handed way that he actually loses people, I think, that he could really appeal to, especially on the left, who are more liberal, looking for a home. He doesn't give them any quarter. And when his solution is, we're going to have patriotic education, what the fuck is patriotic education? What does that mean? Okay, I like the fact that you're, in government institutions, you're now saying this critical theory, this stuff just has no more place in government institutions. We're not going to fund it anymore. But do you really want to replace it with something that's as myopic and incorrect in its own way as the other side is? I mean, there is something to some of the critical theory. There is something to reanalyzing history in the way that some of these revisionists did. We got something we recognized something, certain truths that we didn't incorporate into history before. It unfortunately drowned out essentials, right? With these things that weren't as important. But it's good to know, that Columbus was a terrible governor and was savage in so many ways and greedy. But it's also good to know that he did this. And this is why he's in the history books, because he was extraordinary in this respect. He was like his culture, which pretty much was barbaric everywhere. In this respect, and he was unlike his culture in this respect. And people get historical mention because they're unlike their culture in the ways that they are unlike their culture, in the ways that they're extraordinary. Thomas Jefferson was a slave owner, which was very much like the landed gentry of the South. He was no different in his culture in that respect, but he was in the ideas that he was able to integrate and articulate to the world, and that made it possible for the whole world to reject the phenomenon of slavery. Without him, I don't think we had that. We would have that. I mean, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just saying you made an excellent point, and that is my disappointment with Joe, the libertarian candidate, is the one thing you have going for you as a libertarian candidate is you're not going to win. And you know that you can just stay pure to your ideals. You're going to go out there and be the third alternative, right? And there is no reason to pander to anybody because unless there's some overwhelming movement, right? And if you're pandering, you're already losing your libertarian base as it is, right? So the one thing you can count on, essentially, from an objectivist or a libertarian candidate is the reason they don't have a huge following is because they don't pander, right? They stay true to whatever ideals they have. So to see her pander completely, that was my read on it as well. Either she believes it, at which point she's part of the problem, or she's pandering, and you're like, why are you pandering? You got a job at a think tank that you're looking to move into or something?
Interesting.
I want a capitalist party candidate.
Yes.
Mark Pellegrino would do well, that I can stand behind and vote for, right? I want a serious third party who, by the way, doesn't even need to be an overwhelming favorite to win. But a capitalist party to me is something to throw our weight behind, because that's the right debate to have. The problem with the libertarian candidate is libertarians are all over the place, right? Some are there for drug, legalization, some are there for anarchy, right? But a capitalist party hits the nail on the head. That's the debate that we have to have, right?
Well, I think libertarians are all over the map because they don't have an ethics. They've surgically removed liberty from its why we need it. It's an end unto itself, as opposed to a means to achieving something else, which to me is the protection of reason and the promotion of reason and free action, your rational action. So I think that's why they're all over the map. It's whatever they don't believe in an objective morality. So it's whatever your subjective thing, whatever you equate with doing what you want becomes the pitch point for your version of libertarianism, as opposed to, well, liberty isn't liberty is a corollary of something. It's dependent upon something. It's not axiomatic. It's dependent upon something else. And I think the Capitalist Party goes to the axiom of reason, and so our concept of liberty is shaped from that.
Well, I hope that the Capitalist Party uses some of the books written by members of the Ayn Rand Institute that we saw, some panel discussions about their collections on American history, American values with the American vision, all that kind of stuff, because that's the missing ingredient. I hope that's what Trump wants to introduce into our education. There would be nothing wrong with it. That is what Ayn Rand said is spectacular about the American experiment. So that should be taught. That's not being taught. Why isn't it? There's an absence of self-esteem in our culture.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And of course, the Trump comment is valid in the sense that on education, patriotic education, in the sense that charter schools or private schools where we can educate our children and choose how we want to educate our children is the right answer, right? Government creates a problem by having a government-sponsored school, because of course now you have to say, taught by who? Which ideas are you going to teach? Why are you teaching these over those, right? So the inherent problem is created by the government. So the Trump solution to say we're going to counter woke culture by making sure we teach patriotic, education, which at this point is simply reintroducing basic
Constitutional
civics.
values.
That's right. Is not a bad idea, and I think any libertarian hears that and cringes, and I think maybe the right thing to do is to say we're going to do this patriotic education. And when the left recoils in horror from that, follow it up with, of course, there's always charter schools that you can send your kids to, right? And that's really the right free market solution, right? Is no government school at all, right? Because then you don't have to choose, whose idea, using everybody's tax dollars to choose whose ideas teach over who.
I think Trump is right about a lot of things with respect to education, trying to open up a voucher system or tax breaks for people, trying to privatize more of it, trying to bring a different spin on education and counter woke culture. That's all good news, but he's doing it in a way that's appealing to his conservative base, which I think is animated by some pretty poor principles and a revisionist history of their own, and not to a rational. He's not saying here's a rational history. He's saying a patriotic history. Right. There's a jingoism to that is sort of repulsive to me.
Me too.
But he doesn't have the language to say, and I don't think have the expertise or introspection to say, let's have a rational history. And if he did that, I'd be completely on his side.
Me too. I mean, I hear the same thing, right? I hear that. I cringe a little bit. Like, oh, that's not the way I put it, right? Yes, we need to counter this kind of rewriting of history going on by the left, and you see that. And by the way, of course, I always tell people, 50 years ago, I'd be with them fighting the religious right, on what they're teaching in schools. Mm-hmm. It's just that the culture war was won, and it was won by the left over the past 50 years. And now they're way out there teaching all kinds of crazy things. And we just got to pull them back from the cliff and pull them back to the center.
Is that possible?
I think Trump makes that possible in a unique way, right? I think if Trump comes out and you got Brett Weinstein being chucked out of, I mean, at the same time, you have Brett Weinstein and people like him being thrown out of leftist universities. And Brett is a leftist guy, and he is starting to see that he has more in common with the center than the left, like we said earlier. There's a lot of hope there. Rick and I had met, and I asked him on one of our first podcasts a couple of years ago, how it was like being in the academic maw, the belly of the beast. And he said, I'm not too bad. I'm not really seeing it. And about a year later, he was like, oh my goodness, where did all this come from? Right, Rick?
Oh yeah.
When was that? When was that, Rick?
Around 2016, right after
Yeah.
it's elected. Yeah,
Oh,
everything
okay.
changed massively. It's like a whole generation of sleeper academic woke leftists came out and organized very vocally and beating the drum, and it's made it very, very challenging for me
Mm.
on campus because I am outspoken, as you've seen. It doesn't matter, if it's publicly online. Yeah, so mine is a minority voice on my campus, and I have a few of my colleagues who will come over to me over by the Xerox machine quietly and say, Rick, keep up the good work. I love the stuff that you've been saying on the company email and stuff like that. But,
Does that bother you? I mean,
yes, it does.
that would really bother me.
But don't you get that in Hollywood and
I
whatnot?
do, and it bothers me. I'm like,
Yeah,
I
we
mean,
wanted to ask you, what's it like being you in Hollywood?
Yeah, my line was, what's it like being an intellectually honest maverick in
in
Hollywood?
Hollywood.
Yeah.
I mean, I do get actors who come up to me and say, Mark, thank you so much for the stuff you're doing. I mean, wow. But that doesn't serve me when I'm in front of this firing squads.
Right.
I mean, part of the reason they're able to carry on the way they do is because they think you're isolated and they don't hear your voice, and all they hear are the cacophony of themselves. And maybe if they heard 2 voices, 3 voices, 4 voices, a dozen, they would start to think, maybe I don't have a monopoly on truth. Maybe what I'm saying isn't so popular. And it really sucks. It really sucks feeling like I'm torn, but my emotions tell me it really sucks that people don't have the balls to stand up and get your back. On the other hand, I understand that, their context is maybe very different, and the effect of standing up could be much more damaging for them than me. Hey, but it could be damaging for me too. I noticed bully culture really taking off in 2014. And I started to see it really solidify after Trump was elected. And I told myself, I can't stay quiet. I can't, because they're gaining power because people are too afraid.
Right.
And, look, information is how we make proper choices. And they're damaging my epistemology by closing all these doors and windows and not letting information happen. So for my own self-preservation epistemologically and in my integrity, I had to stand up and say something.
I think Rand would argue that if you've built your life in a way of dealing with irrational people, that you're building, you are paying the consequences of that, right? So, you had an opportunity to work with these people or these people, and you chose, it didn't matter. And now when it does matter, because you've built your life in a certain way, you're very vulnerable. You can't speak about your real political views because you chose to work at a company where everybody will fire you or attack you for your political views. Now, I'm not saying that to make anybody wrong. What I'm saying is, what she would probably argue is know you're in the position you're in today, because it does matter who you work for. It does matter how you organize your life. It does matter what your livelihood depends on. Is depending upon the rationality of other men, or is depending upon the irrationality of other men. And step by step, start extricating yourself and your dependencies on your life from, as much as possible, from the sway of the irrational.
Create the conditions that you need in order to have genuine autonomy and authenticity in your life.
Right. And one way you can do that is by being outspoken, like you are, right? Because if you say it, the chips fall where they may, right? If you're out there, you know exactly where you stand with people. That's one way to do it. Now, some people may not feel, they feel vulnerable because they have a family and children to provide for and whatnot. But they have to get to the point where you're living an authentic life, right? So, you can't be in the closet really on any issue and live a happy, rational, rationally exuberant life. You have to live your values, know your values well, and live them. And I always think that the people who come to you and me and Rick and say, thank you for what you're doing, I don't think I can do that myself. One of the reasons they can't do that, I tell myself, is because they're not as grounded as I am. If they had the level of confidence I have in my ideas, they would be saying the same things I am, right? It's because they're not really sure. They're not sure if they're right or they're wrong. They've been kind of told their entire lives there is nothing to be certain of, like you said, right? There is no real world. It's all just perspectives. Who are you to have an opinion over the mob? That's one thing. And then I also remind myself that we aren't all equal, that I am a debater personality by nature, right? I have a high verbal IQ. I enjoy tussling with
And
these
the
ideas.
three of us
Mhm.
experienced bullying early in life and
Mhm.
developed a resolve to always stand up to bullies.
Well, yeah. But again, how do you help these people? You help them a couple ways. You give them a community so they don't feel alone, and you give them a framework. So if they don't have my background in debate and logic and fallacy, that they can identify and they have good answers for things, and they have a place they can go on the web or whatever to get
The Guardian Project.
like the Guardian Project, right? Or the Level to Power, or even these logical fallacy sites that we're actually going to have as well, where people can help identify when they're in an argument. And there's a forum they can go to and say, this person said this to me. What's the best response for this? There has to be something like that, and certainly in the context of bullying. Because they're going to be bullying again at three levels. There's logic. I'm not sure if you can well, I bully people with logic all the time. So yes, you can bully with logic.
Yeah.
Then of course there's the insult bullying.
Sophistry is
and then of course
logical bullying.
Exactly. And then of course there's the physical bullying as well. So giving people resources, because again, they aren't you, right? And that's what they're telling themselves, by the way. When they come to you and say, Mark, thanks for speaking out, man, right? And you're like, yeah, but you got to say something too. They're like, oh, I'm not you.
Yeah, they're saying
you stand against the mob.
What's distinctive about you as opposed to me is that you have courage.
That's
I
exactly
don't.
what they're saying.
Thank you.
well, that's what you try not to say, to Mark's point, because I've had the same experience. And I say, thank you, right? But what I'm trying not to say is, all you're telling me is that you know what's right or wrong, and you lack the moral courage and the conviction of your ideals to actually do anything about it. You're part of the problem here. And sometimes we give them a watered down version of that, like the enemy triumphs, evil triumphs when good men do nothing, and tell them that we need to do things. But they always say the same thing. I'm not you. I can't argue like you argue. I can't. I'm worried about my physical safety if I'm attacked.
Well, in my corner of the universe in academia, the problem is built into it's like a de facto norm. It's an axiom almost of like a mantra in academia. Keep your mouth shut until you get tenure. Even not just about political things, but like if your dissertation advisor, even like all the way through, the people who are going to grade you, you don't want to write a dissertation that critiques your dissertation advisor's theory. This kind of, you're probably not going to get through. And then if you're lucky enough to get a job on a tenure track, it's 5 to 7 years where everybody's telling you, to toe the line. Don't say anything. Don't step out of line until you get tenure. Well, by the time you've done that, you've compromised for 15 years of your life. You've gotten used to not having a voice. It's a terrible thing.
And that's how establishments are created
Exactly.
and cemented in our world.
Yeah.
So to your point about the Guardian Project, I actually had a larger idea that in this, everybody has a tribe now. Everybody's tribing up, right? So you got this tribe over here who are now gangs on the street, burning things. And you got this tribe that's opposing them, wandering around. And the individualists are out there going, this is one of those times it'd be nice to have a tribe, but I'm an individualist. I don't have a tribe, right? Now, this is where, in my opinion, individualists need to band together into a tribe. There needs to be some easy mechanism by which you can connect with like-minded people.
Atlantis.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, but even a virtual Atlantis, right? Where
right.
now, but do this in a variety of realms. Finance, you need help with money and jobs and saving advice and investing advice. Safety, do you have a plan for after the election? Are what's the right emergency supplies to have on hand? What's the right model of radio and CB to have after so you have these different areas of your life: your mind, your philosophy, your physical safety, your money, and then of course relating to building in your local area some kind of physical tribe that you can protect yourself. So we've talked about when people need that, people who are like-minded, who feel alone, giving them that sense of community on all these different levels, because whichever one is the worst is going to hold you back, right? If your health is low because you're not exercising, that's going to impact your ability to do anything else. If your finances are low or you're financially vulnerable to people, politically, then that's going to impact what you can do. So we've talked about having some kind of general resource in all these different areas, a meeting place of sorts. And I don't see it online. Anywhere where it might kind of exist is on a Facebook where they can just shut you off tomorrow. So that doesn't really solve your problem. So I have some ideas on that, and we'll keep you posted on that, Mark. And I feel like certainly if it'd be nice for us if we have anything that comes up for bullying, we can direct them to you. Or if you need a home for bullying, then we'll give you a place where you can put your content where they can go. When it comes to philosophy and politics, of course, we're already going to be building that out. So people want to know how to think, or ways of thinking that are different than they have. We're going to have that. The Capitalist Party might be a very, very good place to have a home there. But I think, it really is going to be about how do we connect with each other, like-minded people, to survive whatever's coming.
Right. So it's not like the two people who I see near the Xerox machine, the only ones that I know that are supporting me. Right? If we could all somehow or another connect online or somehow else.
Yeah, and we thought we had that. Honestly, I thought we had that 15 years ago with social media. It turns out we don't. Right? It turns out that there's some overlords there that will decide who can talk to each other and who can't. And do you have the right ideas, and do you not have the right ideas? We have certain ideas that I think are the right ones, and we need a meeting place, and I don't really see it out there. So if we don't see it out there as a good objectivist and capitalist, I think that's an opportunity, a market opportunity. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure how much. Yeah, I'm not. And our interest is not to make money on it. Our interest is to honestly have a community. I can't tell you the number of people who are calling me because I'm like a doomsday prepper. I've been telling people for years they need to stockpile all kinds of things. And I'm getting, tons of calls from people going, "Hey, Mark, what kind of food do I need to store? What kind of this do I need to have?" And I said, "Okay, I'm just going to throw up a website for you guys where you can go and just, get all my information." And but then I said, how nice would it be if you had the app where you could connect to like-minded people in your area and say, if this is going to go down, I got 86 people. If the woke mob shows up at Rick Repetti's house with torches, right?
Hey, don't give them any ideas.
Who do we know? Or they mob them on Twitter, right? Because they got 800 people signing a petition against them. Well, we need a bunch of people who are like-minded to go sign a petition the other way, right? We need our own people to be able to rally around, because they'll do it. There's just no mechanism to rally them. I think the opposing forces have done a very good job in the past 10 years of building the mechanisms of power to rally their people into herds and to stampede them in certain directions. And like I said, we have a bunch of cats that we need to herd, which is a higher bar, but I think it can be done.
But the Guardian Project is definitely moving in that direction. So that's a good thing. That's why we like it.
I think so too. I think it could be a hub. I think we should put our heads together and figure out a way to network to make these things happen, to make this happen in the real world, because it's great what you're talking about. So I love the idea.
We've been here quite a while. I think you might have to go. Before you do, is there anything else you want to tell people listening to our podcast?
Keep on thinking. Check your premises, and always be closing, as they say. Stand up for what's right. And reason is right, rationality is right, and do your best not to be afraid of the horde. The horde is weak. That's why there's a lot of them, because they're sort of weak. And one man with reason is a lever that can move the whole world. So don't be intimidated by mobs.
Yeah. Excellent having you here today, Mark. Thanks for doing it.
Thanks for having me, guys. It was great talking to you.
Likewise.
Very good. And Mark, we're going to be in touch with you on some creative ideas we can have around your Guardian project and the fundraising. Like I said, our commitment is to help you make that $20,000 goal. We're 100% committed. You're going to make it. There's no doubt you're going to make it.
Let's do it. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that.
We'll rally around the best way to rally our supporters around that. So we'll be in touch.
All right. Thanks, guys. Great to see you.
Be well.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.